Hello. Over the course of the past few years, we've been restoring many of the features of our church. We're just about to finish the disabled access to the south porch. Perhaps the greatest thing we've done, the most prominent of the things we can see, there's lots of gutters and tiles which have to be done before anything else, but the most prominent thing we can see is the great west window of our church. As the sun sets in the west, the light pours in, and so the theme we took for the narrative of the window was the Transfiguration of the Lord, and that's the feast we keep today. So, as the sun goes down in the west, the light comes into the church, and we see the Lord's whole body transfigured with light. The disciples, Peter, James and John, below that, and either side of the Lord is Moses with his tablets of the law, and Elijah with his ravens, those who came to feed him when he was at the Wadi of Korith. And above that are the words of the Father, and above that is the dove of the Holy Spirit. So the Trinity revealed in this declaration. As the Trinity was revealed at the declaration, the Epiphany, the showing forth of the Lord at the River Jordan. Now this is this feast of the Transfiguration, and the event of the Transfiguration says everything really for us. It's kept as a feast today, and we'll come on to why that is in a moment, but the episode of the Transfiguration we see today, obviously, and we also see in Lent as well, as the Lord approaches, moves his way, turns his face towards Jerusalem to go to his passion and his death. And this, it is said, is to strengthen disciples for the shock of what they're going to see, to ready them to see that this is the Lord who is going through this. Now, when they went up onto the mountain on Tabor to pray, he took away with him, those three disciples, his closest ones, Peter, James and John, and he was transfigured in their sight, and light poured out of him, the divine light, which is life, which is love, which is being, poured out from him. And there either side was the greatest of the lawgivers and the greatest of the prophets, bringing together the whole of the former covenants, plural, and now moving into the new and definitive covenant, singular. So everything had come up to him, and he brought all these things together. He didn't get rid of the old covenants, he brought them together and perfected them in his own blood, in his own body, in his own divine and human nature, in that one person. Now, we decided to put that window into the church because that's what happens to us in the church. When we receive the sacraments, primarily the Eucharist, he enters us. Baptism opens the doors, and then the Eucharist comes in. And we are identified by the Father as Jesus. We call him our Father, and he calls us his Son. We're no longer individual children, we're now the Son. We're no longer Christopher and Mary and Susan and Tariq. We're all Jesus. That's important. And now the Lord himself comes to us in the Eucharist, and his light and his life comes out of us. So we participate, we share in his divinity. We are divinized. The work of theosis in Greek happens with us. We become as God. God becomes man so that man can become God, and this is the vehicle, this is the mechanism by which it happens. And so what happens to the Lord, that light pouring out of him, it happens to us. When we come to church, that is what happens to us. So we go out into the world as light bearers, as Christ bearers, as Christophers. Now, today's feast on the 6th of August was established to commemorate the lifting of the Siege of Belgrade in 1456. Now, it's part of that history of Europe, which rumbles on for several centuries, that the Ottoman Turks are pushing into Eastern Europe after the fall of Constantinople. In the middle of the 15th century, they're pushing and pushing and pushing, and the next part is Hungary. And they're pushing and pushing, and they go to Belgrade, and they surround it. And all through the summer, they've laid siege to Belgrade. The King of Hungary, Hunyadi, has been trying to rally troops together. The Pope himself sent a Franciscan friar, John Capistrano, to go and preach not only against heresy, which was breaking out there, but also to preach to bring people in support of the Christian forces against the incursions of the Ottoman Turkish Empire, what it would become. I'm going to see this again at Vienna and at Lepanto and so on. But 1456, on this day, just before this day, the encircling Turkish forces, Ottoman forces, had broken through the first defensive wall of Belgrade. It had 2 defensive walls and a great tower, very well protected. They'd broken through. And Hunyadi had come down the river Danube because the city was encircled, and he'd broken through the Sultan's fleet there and captured quite a few ships. And he was preparing to bring a counterattack against the encircling forces. He told them all in the tower to throw down wood and flammable material, and then to set it on fire. So what happened is the 2 forces of the Turkish attacking force were split in 2 by a wall of fire, and then Hunyadi could attack them. So he split them in 2, and then he could pick them off one by one. And it was working. And then John of Capistrano came in, this very fiery and determined, brilliant Franciscan friar, and he was holding up his crucifix as he led the troops into battle. Many of those troops were peasant farmers who'd come from all over, about 40,000 of them. Not trained, but full of determined zeal to protect their country. Anyway, on this day, the Christian forces were successful, and the Sultan was injured, and they retreated back to Constantinople. And so Christian Europe, the eastern part of Europe, had been saved again. And so the Pope declared this the great feast of the Transfiguration for the Western Church. You see, for Christianity, one of those very, very central tenets, and we've been looking at it as we look at who is the person of Christ, is that the flesh itself, this flesh itself, is full of God. And it's the flesh in itself, our human nature, from which divine life pours. Divine light illumines everything. Now that's anathema to religions like Islam, who have an absolute transcendent difference between the creator and the creature. But for Christians, it's not like that. The creator himself, the words of the creator, have become part of the creation. So now creation itself bears the nature of the creator. The divine becomes flesh, so that flesh can become divine. God becomes man, so that man becomes God. And that is foolish and outrageous, but it's our faith. And the Transfiguration shows that, just in the same way that bread and wine bear the God-man himself, and that God is love. And our relationship with God is not one of slaves or servants, but one of friends. And more than that, lovers. And these claims of Christianity are what the Transfiguration is about. Whew, that was a lot. By the way, it's one of the reasons why we say the Angelus at noon. So the Pope wanted the whole of Christendom to say the Angelus, and the noonday bell is still retained, as we say the Angelus, and some of the Protestant cities who continue to, as a tradition from the Middle Ages, still ring a noonday bell. They're not quite sure perhaps why they ring it, but we are. Happy feast, and be joyful for what happens in us as we participate in him, and pray that the divine light which comes into us will bring his gentle joy and his love to the world around us. And may his holy angels, as angels of light which gaze upon him night and day, who he sends to us to help us, wrap you and fold you in their care and love, and all those whom you love both in this world and the next.